hope everyone's doing well on this 15th of March already. So just the handout, I found this, just some caregiving tips, because I know everyone's, always kind of asking for some information. This one is specific for, we've got 3 presentations. This is for like more of the earlier stage. Then there's one for the mid and one for the late, but we weren't going to do those unless there really was a need for that. I'm going to go through it, and we're kind of going to run through, because I know most of you guys have been at the other ones or have seen them. So, some of the information is very basic, so I'm not going to keep us here longer than we need to go through it. But we're talking tonight with living with Alzheimer's, and this is for the care partners. And part of what it is tonight is being able to take care of yourself as that caregiver, because if you can't take care of yourself, it's very hard to be able to take care of your loved one, but it also is very hard to find time to take care of yourself while you're taking care of your loved one. Now, there we go. Describe the symptoms of the early stage of Alzheimer's disease. Explain the legal, financial, and resource planning that needs to be done in the early stages. Define the components of a care team and describe how to successfully work with each component during the early stage of the disease. So I think we're going to end up having some overlap with some of the other, presentations that we've done, but this is designed specifically like if an organization wanted this one presentation, not like what we've been doing, kind of the series. Dementia obviously is the general term. Remember, it's the umbrella. There's different types on the bottom: Alzheimer's, vascular, mixed dementia with Lewy bodies, frontal temporal, Parkinson's disease. Dementia is a general term for the groups of the disorders that affect thinking, memory, judgment, and personality. It's the brain changes based on what's happening in your brain. Alzheimer's disease can have trouble with memory, which is probably what is the most common when people start going, oh, I'm having issues with my memory, am I having a concern with Alzheimer's? Thinking, when you're having that loss of words or losing yourself in conversation. And then behaviors, where it could be, the sundowning or the wandering, or somebody who, for my mom, just almost became mute, didn't talk. So you're noticing different things. The biggest difference, it's not a normal part of aging. There is going to be some brain changes as you age, but the changes that are happening to Alzheimer's is different than what would be happening with it. Symptoms obviously are going to vary from among individuals. That's also going to be with when somebody's in what's considered the early stage for one person may be different than the early stage for somebody else. I think part of it also has to do with when somebody was diagnosed. When did you start to see the symptoms? So we don't necessarily say, oh, the early stage is from this date to 2.45 years. It can be different. I've mentioned before, my mom was only on it for a 5-year journey. President Reagan was 10 years. People can go, 15, 20 years. So it just kind of depends on when the diagnosis is, when they can start. The disease leads to the nerve cell death and tissue loss throughout the brain, affecting nearly all its functions. And that's why as the disease progresses, people lose the different abilities, and it almost ends up being like childlike. And I've used that metaphor before of like having a toddler that you're raising. Your loved one almost starts to go back to those stages. And sometimes, they say it's terminal. There's a lot of diseases that are terminal. What ends up being, I think, with the terminal part is, unless there's something else that they would die of, they may end up just dying of pneumonia from it at the end, because they're losing the abilities with swallowing, feeding, eating, and that's for somebody that may have had it for a longer period of time. FDA-approved treatments. Until now, there are treatments available only address, and the big part is symptoms. So these are different types of medicines. There's not a cure until, research is done to find a cure. This is just going to help the different symptoms. Treatments work in varying degrees and are not effective for everyone. My mom was on Aricept and Namenda. We didn't seem to see any change. There was nothing seemed to help, and we did not. We took her off them. I see someone writing some down, so I don't want to move to the next slide. Treatments, talk to your doctor whenever considering treatments. Discuss potential side effects. There's, the misunderstanding that medicine is going to cure it. Like a blood pressure medicine helps us bring down our blood pressure. This is just going to help the symptoms that are going on. The unfortunate part is when the brain cells die, they've died. And that's the scary part of the disease. Early stage symptoms: memory changes in executive function, concentration changes, difficulty with reasoning and abstract thinking. And when you're getting into with the reasoning, and that's why one of the things on the caregiver tips is trying not to argue with the individual, trying to be able to say, we need to be where that person is, unless they're in, as long as they're not in danger, doesn't make a difference that they still think Aunt Carol is alive or not. Difficulty with language and the ability to communicate. That's when you get into that loss of words, not finding the right word. Ties into then the behavioral piece of it, where somebody may start to withdraw from activities because they are starting to realize that their communication is changing. Impaired judgment, that turns into a lot when there's financial issues that are going on. Impaired judgment, anything, say, with driving. Confusion with time or place, and that's why if you go to the doctor, they're going to ask you, do you know what date it is? Do you know what city you're in? Do you know what year we are in? Those basic questions. Difficulty with visual spatial relations, having to do with the layout, like somebody, could come in here and the carpet, just this design would really affect somebody who's going from the floor to the carpet. And I talked about the other week where as the disease is progressing, the amount of space that you're seeing is going from that wide when we're 25 to things are closing in to binocular to almost like half. So that's obviously going to affect withdrawal from work or social activities, personality changes. All right, Alan, let's.
We live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, we moved out there from the West Coast. My wife and I were both employed by the airlines, Pacific Southwest Airlines, and then U.S. Air. And we moved out to Pittsburgh in '93. And as far as the diagnosis goes, I had been a pilot for 30 years for U.S. Airways, and was going through an international training course to fly internationally, and I'd made a couple of crossings of the Atlantic, and was having some problems. Just calculating simple things like fuel burns. I mean, not to get technical, but you launch across the ocean, you really need to know your fuel situation, and then you have checkpoints that predicated fuel burns all the way across, and every so many degrees of latitude you add it up and make sure that your burn is at or better than what you need to keep going. It's simple math, that just adding and subtracting, and I was having trouble getting the right answers. I was making mistakes, general math, and having some memory problems. There's a lot of chatter on the radio, and a lot of it comes in really fast. And we used to joke around that you could read a newspaper, tell a joke, and not miss a radio call, because you could multitask. And I wasn't having problems reading back clearances. And one thing led to another, and I went back for a check ride and failed the check ride.
So just think about that here's a pilot and, starting to notice. Thank God he's, gone, and thank God for the co-pilot. But just, those things that he was able, obviously in his line of work, that he was having questions that I'm sure that, addition and the fuel, all of that was probably second nature. My guess is he probably, flew for many years. And it's those type of things. It's, when the family starts to notice different things. Words from a caregiver. Success means that you found a way to be happy with the confines of this disease. And it's very hard. It's hard. I don't know how, I don't want to mislead you. I don't want to, I can't sugarcoat. It's just, there will be more, building our village of people, to be able to help the caregiver. Where to start? Accepting the diagnosis, developing your care team, beginning to make plans for the future, the legal, financial, future care, safety, living each day to the fullest. And, going back with making plans for the future, that is because obviously, the person has to be competent to be able to get the notary to sign the information. And so I think if anybody hasn't done it, you definitely want to do that before they get to the point that there's any concerns in wanting to know what the individual's wishes would be. Accept the diagnosis that the future plans will change. And for my parents, they had 1 year of living in an active adult community, and a year later, my mom started getting sick, and so their plans definitely changed. Accept your feelings. Give yourself time. I think part is too, it's almost like having time to grieve the retirement or the life that you were hoping you would have. You're no longer able to have or going to have. That's where hopefully, we'll be able to get a support group here so that other caregivers can come together and just feel like they're in an environment with other people who understand.
When Bill and I went to the doctors, we went to several doctors. We had doctors that got angry because he missed appointments or that I wasn't there, and I didn't even realize I was supposed to be there. I know that now. I've read several good books, and I know that I should have been with him the whole time. When we finally found a doctor through the Alzheimer's Association and went to see the doctor, when he gave us the diagnosis of Alzheimer's, he also challenged us that day. He said, this is what you need to do. Not die from Alzheimer's. You need to do 3 things. Get an attorney and get all of your paperwork together. Get involved and volunteer for clinical trials, for tests, for whatever you can to make a difference. And get a support group. And it was the best advice we've been given, and it was the most positive that we had been given. And it was the first time we thought that we could live with the disease rather than just die from it.
I think that's a wonderful outlook to try to have. It's very hard because it's not a fun disease to deal with, but I have to wonder if anyone that's going through a cancer battle, the family would say that's not an easy journey to have either. Forming your care team, you're in the middle, the person with the disease and the care partner. Your healthcare community, I've mentioned before, if you're not comfortable with what your doctor says, or if your gut's telling you something else, find another doctor. See if there's recommendations that they have for, support groups, for outreach. Could we potentially be able to bring in, if they're having, some speech issues, could speech therapy potentially help some? It's not going to cure it, but it may be able to make a difference. I think, too, as the disease is becoming more prevalent, there's going to be more doctors that are going to know more about it. Things are being talked about more. Family, friends, and work. My guess is most of you all are probably retired, so hopefully the work isn't an issue. Family and friends, for family members, realize there's going to be different reactions for different family members. Friends, hopefully, I think, your true friends are going to be your true friends that are with you thick and thin. And there's going to be some friends who, unfortunately, won't be with you along the journey. And then, community resources, obviously the Alzheimer's Association, any support groups, any information, clinical trials, anything like that of what is it that we can do to try to make it easier for the caregiver, and what can we do to try to make it easier for the person living with Alzheimer's. Work as a unit, monitor shifts and functioning, prepare for the appointments, choosing time together, discussing the monitored changes, noting questions and concerns, reviewing care plans as a team. And it may be that you have an adult child that you want to start going to the appointments, especially if it ends up that the adult child is kind of in denial or not really where they may need to be. Maybe it ends up, having them come to an appointment, trying to be able, the best way you can to include your loved one with the Alzheimer's, if it's feasible for them to be part, of the discussion, but it's also being respectful of them that they are there in that appointment. So you're trying to include them in the conversation, but it's that fine line. But you don't want to just talk to the doctor and almost be ignoring them. So you just have to, I think the big is taking notes. If you've got family members that have noticed changes or have concerns, bring those concerns with you when you go to talk to a doctor.
I guess the biggest challenge for me is just to take it a day at a time and to begin to learn to talk so that Marianne is not intimidated. To not say, isn't it going to be fun where we're going over the weekend, but to simply tell her, isn't it going to be fun when we go to Mary's house for dinner on Saturday night? And then I think all of our family has learned to talk in those ways. And I think to learn strategies is the big important thing. As I talk to families on my own when I'm with Marianne, and I get a lot of the questions, even more so sometimes than Marianne does, is to try to help people to understand, if you're just getting into this, to learn to talk face to face. I think very often, and especially in long-time marriages, people, and I haven't really thought this through completely, but I think people talk across the room, and we talk in a loud voice when we're talking across the room, but talking in a loud voice is very intimidating for the principal person. As a companion, I think I've learned to come together, to come closer to both, I think, physically and as we talk about something, to try to get a lot more into the conversation, into the moment that Marianne is interested in at that particular point, rather than be about exactly what I'm doing at the moment, but try to be at her level of interest, and if it's a frustrating moment, to try to calm the moment. as you may suspect, if two people are frustrated, it doesn't help at all. If I can be the less frustrated one, I think it seems to help. Might frustrate Mary Ann if I'm not at her level of frustration, but I try to be the calming one.
And it may end up at that moment that you're having to go give yourself a break, that you're having to walk into the other room, walk across the room or something to be able to be that calm, to try to get to be where they are. I think part of the frustration ends up being because here's our loved one, and it's like remembering what they used to be, and it's trying to come to terms and accept where they are. But it's what you need to do for yourself to try to be where they are, but also try to do it in a calming manner. That's when, they talk about coming from the front and, necessarily getting down, eye level so there's nothing that's startling them. It's going to be more short questions, some that can be yes or no. It's hard because my mom was obviously could talk like I can, and you couldn't have those conversations anymore. And I think that was some of the hardest part was I miss my mom that I used to be able to talk to on the phone or talk to in person. And you're trying to come to terms with that. But then you also realize, and I think I've mentioned before, it's like the joy of a child when they see, the flowers that are blooming. And they take such excitement in that is stop and really smell the roses with them and being that moment instead of it being so focused on, unless you're really running late, enjoy what they're enjoying at that time instead of trying to put your agenda that's on there. Oh, good Lordy, sorry. Got a little excited. Okay. Optimize the person's sense of well-being through physical exercise, gardening, walking. Part is, what they say. Unfortunately, my dad basically put my mom in front of the TV. The TV became her babysitter and never, took her out to exercise. One concern is a lot that their gait. So you just have to be careful. Not everyone may necessarily have issues with the gait that they're shuffling, so that if it has to be, if they need a walker or a cane or anything like that. Gardening, it could be something with, you've gotten some potting soil in a pot and you're almost letting them, kind of dig it. If you can set it up in an area, it's almost as if you're having to set up activities sometimes like you had to do if you had children, or you're setting up for the grandchildren in a way. And you have to, maybe it's not potting soil, it's, the styrofoam balls or, packing stuff or something that's giving them and knowing, or, maybe if they really like to garden, you can let them, plant some flowers or some herbs, something that you're trying to allow them. Reading is hard if they're able to, or, reading to them a lot, to see if a book on tape might work. We've talked before about, the way music is definitely has an influence. Social interaction, main contact with friends, family, community. I think that ends up being important because as the disease progresses, probably in most likelihood, they're going to be very non-social. And so while you have the opportunity, not that you have to come down for every activity that Glen Eyre is offering, but if you can involve them in something socially for them, for yourself, it's almost like be able to do it while you can, because there may end up coming a time and you're not going to be able to do that. Care partner teams are more successful at navigating a health care system. Be present at appointments. I think that as a caregiver. I think if you can help, if there's an adult child, maybe there's a friend if there's not adult children, so it doesn't end up having to feel like it's all falling on you, the caregiver, being able to share the information with somebody else in case, let's say you wake up one day and you're not able to go to the appointment with them. And it can be, document what the doctor says, their suggestions, and bringing in your documentation of any changes of things that you've noted. Somebody's taking notes, so I don't want to switch it on them. I was going to print this out, but it's like 30 pages, and then I'm like, does somebody want all that? And then I will say, the Alzheimer's Association has wonderful resources, and when I went into like the caregiving tips, it was like 15 pages, and I'm like, and that's where I ended up finding just this one page, kind of get it, but definitely go on the Alzheimer's website. Okay.
I remember with Bob's mother, we were first married. She had some problems. She couldn't keep jobs. And she would, start to repeat herself. We ended up in the later stages taking care of her. If Bob's father, for instance, he was had to work on a day that was a holiday, for instance, and had nowhere to take her, we would watch her, and many nights Bob would go over there and be with her. His father was out of town. So we were somewhat familiar, but at that time, nobody knew what was wrong with Janet, and they said it was senility, and it wasn't. They never mentioned the Alzheimer's word. Bob's father was an excellent caregiver, but he survived this ordeal by being in denial. And I'll never forget, Bob's aunt told us a story about how she took Janet to a gynecologist, and Janet couldn't write a check. So Nancy wrote the check for her and had Janet sign it. And afterwards she was puzzled and went up to the doctor and said, "What's wrong with Janet?" And he looked at her, matter of fact, "She's got Alzheimer's." So when Nancy went home to tell Bob's dad that Janet had Alzheimer's, he blew up. And he said, "She does not have Alzheimer's." So we never really mentioned the word Alzheimer's. We just took care of Janet and just pretended that nothing was wrong. And I guess looking back, I felt like Janet never really had anybody that she could say, "What's wrong with me?" Because nobody ever told Janet. So I guess because of it, I've gone the opposite end, and I feel like I need to be with Bob. I need to be with him and talk to him about this and be open with our children and not try to hide it.
I can't imagine being in denial with it. I think, we've talked about that it is a scary disease. It's the whole unknown, but I think people going through a cancer diagnosis or Parkinson's or ALS, none of them are good, but in a way that the damage that them being in denial and not letting her know that she had it. But again, that all is going to play into what the family dynamics are. A care partner has multiple roles. You're an encourager, you're a companion, you're a supporter, you're a planner, the money manager, and probably the most important thing is you're their advocate. And with doing all of that, it's exhausting because we've said before, at least when you're in the terrible twos, they move up to the trying threes. When you're going through Alzheimer's, sometimes it can be very hard, and that's why it's important as the caregiver that you're trying to take care of yourself. And see, with the way she's talking to him, trying to get down at his level, I think that, shows you that you're bringing compassion, you're bringing empathy to the individual, and who knows what, because clearly something was going on, or my guess is looking at it that this was, maybe something was said or he saw something that was troubling. And if that's his wife or his daughter is, trying to be there, maybe she's, encouraging him there, or she's supporting him in what's going on. And I think it ends up being, if you can kind of keep them, when they're at a place, you have to be the one to keep yourself calm so that they're not picking up that vibe if they're going. But it's hard, and it may be, again, that you've got to go take a breath and come back. The money manager, obviously, hopefully you've gotten that all kind of figured out ahead of time, especially if it's the husband that has it and he was the one that always paid the bills, that the wife knows what's going on. And, the other part of that is, if husbands and wives, on the checking account, with potentially getting one of your adult children on the account in case something, God forbid, happens to the caregiver before something happens to the person living with dementia. Helping the person stay independent, use notes or calendars, trying to stay organized, assist without offending. And again, it's the fine line of you're trying to be respectful, treat them with dignity, and it may end up being, you could say, hey, Mom, we're going to be getting ready to go to the grocery store. You want to make a grocery list, and giving her the opportunity, even though it could be completely wrong or whatever, it's kind of engaging her in the activity and feeling like she's getting part of, of what that needs to be, using notes or calendars to look to see sometimes, as the disease is going to progress, with the time of day, the clock that's the big and digital that says AM or PM, that they can get adjusted to what, the time of day is, or, it's almost as if using a calendar that you're talking about the different seasons of the year based on what the weather is doing, and just try to include them as much as you can.
Well, he wasn't able to work. He lost the one job. He did try working again, but then just couldn't seem to manage that. It was hard to focus. So that was a big blow for him because he loved working. It's really important. So we had to find other things to do. I had already retired, but I worked part-time. So we've sort of enrolled him he enrolled himself in some classes, part of George Mason called Ollie for geezer people. They're really very good college classes. So he goes to classes, and then he developed his own photography business, started getting interested in photography. He's always taken a million pictures. A lot of his shots on trips turned out really well. So we started making cards out of them and giving them to friends. And in Great Falls, where we live, there's this artist community, which he joined. They have coffee every Thursday. And they have exhibits right now. Some of his work is being exhibited at a veterinary clinic. His pictures of horse and birds. And so we're taking more pictures and doing more things, and he's going to sell some things at craft fairs. He does a good job. So being involved in the arts, getting active, we now volunteer for Meals on Wheels. We volunteer for Food for Others. We're active in the church. He goes to a breakfast every Tuesday for the men in the church. So he's found a way to be active in other ways, and that's really important. We exercise a lot. I like to travel, get new mental stimulation. So that's pretty much, but our lives have changed a lot because of that, because he did enjoy working and they couldn't do that. So we had to find workarounds.
She's a great example of how they're trying to adjust to what that change need to be. I would, probably recommend that if my hope is he's not driving, say she's dropping him off for the breakfast, for, the arts, the coffee, that maybe there's somebody there that she feels comfortable with sharing kind of what's going on with him, just in case it ends up, that he's repeating himself or he's going completely off topic, that they're not, concerns, but it's wonderful, to be able to stay active Because I think for any of us, there's going to be a time when we're not going to be able to be active. And we might as well try to do it while we can and be able to, bring some joy to them, joy to you. It could hopefully, she drops them off for the coffee. Who knows, maybe that gives her 30, 45 minutes, and she may be sitting in the car by herself, but she gets to sit in the car by herself. So it's, seeing if there would be an activity, if they're at the stage where, they still would be able to participate in something. Tips for helping the person stay active: continue everyday tasks and routines to maintain the sense of self. Focus on unique strengths and interests. With that, see if there's, like he did photography. Was there something that, is, woodworking? You don't have to get into all the fancy tools, but is there something that can be done, in a way of something that used to, interest them? Modify activities to match the abilities. That is something that will have to be adapted throughout the progression of the disease based on what their ability is. Plan for rest periods for them, for yourself. Concentrate on the process, not the result. And it's, if they're doing some watercolors and they insist that, the bird's going to be red instead of blue or something, let the bird be red, because does it really matter? Hopefully it's something that they're enjoying doing. And it's helping them feel, I think, useful, feel valued, feel a sense of accomplishment for them.
We were just entering into the empty nest phase when Laura was diagnosed. I'm not sure that we had a plan of a bucket list, as it were, of things we wanted to accomplish during those years. We certainly look forward to having more time together as a couple and doing things that we enjoy. But we got the Alzheimer's diagnosis, and that has become our advocating and raising awareness has become our cause for this period in our lives. We literally take each day as it comes. I tell people our lives work today. Do they work a year from now? I don't know. But they work today. We enjoy today. We do what we want to today. I think that the diagnosis has given us a sense of appreciation for our lives and how wonderful we have had it. I think it also has given us a sense of urgency to do some things that perhaps, at least our tendency is always say, well, we'll do that next year, or we'll do that in a couple of years, or we'll do that when we retire. And now we live what I call the fierce urgency of now. If there's something we want to do, let's do it. And that's one of the messages I try to give to not just caregivers, but friends and family, is that you are not guaranteed tomorrow. If there's something that you want to do it. Don't wait.
I think that's, great advice, because we all know none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. And, they're trying to make the best of what the situation is. And yes, they, empty nesters, I can only imagine what that would be like. And the idea that you could go off and do things or volunteer here or get part-time jobs or whatever, and then this Alzheimer's diagnosis comes in and it changes all that. And you have to kind of accept that, but you're trying to make the best of what's going on and live in the present. And, it's almost like when they say for someone, if you're giving a diagnosis of, 6 months to a year, what would you end up doing in that time? And we don't necessarily know. For Alzheimer's, it can be several years. But, if we could take that approach to try to do what you can off your bucket list, so that, especially to be able to try to give them the opportunity. They may end up forgetting in 6 months what you did, but knowing that you had that time together and you were able to, it's almost as if you're trying to live life without those regrets. maintaining closeness and intimacy, using loving words and physical touch, engaging in shares experience that include touch, discussing issues directly, taking care of yourself and get support. I mean, obviously for, a husband and wife, that's all going to be the dynamic of, what your relationship was like. I think sometimes it is too just, sitting with the person. If you can have friends come in, if you have your, adult children, and just being able to be there with the individual so that they're, it's like feeling your presence. For my older brother, he couldn't handle my mom's diagnosis and would come into town on business and drop something off at the house without seeing my mom. And that was just very, very hard to know. But we realized with him, he couldn't handle it. And, but I think, for this, depending on, our loved ones still in there, it's just, they're at a different dynamic of what their life is. Tips for coping. Your role is made easier by asking for and accepting help. That's probably, a lot when people offer to help, let them, if you be willing to do it. Share your feelings a lot, with that, if you can end up being in like a support group. Listening without judging. Communicating that you will be there. Working together as a team, and that would obviously be with your care team or your family members, or if you end up calling in, like home care, hopefully you'd have the same companion or caregiver that's able to come in. Experience moments together. Determining what really matters. Doing it now, redefining intimacy. I mean, unless there's something that you have to do, it almost like, because sometimes I think if we just could try to put ourselves in their shoes for a day and really sit back and watch them observe, spring, once we can get through this cold weather, being able to sit and go look at the flowers and then just see what they're experiencing and how, because I think there's so much that they can teach us. It's just, we're so, this is not my person, this isn't who we are, we're having to deal with this, and it's not that you can do it every day, but if you could find time in your day, but, go back and ask for help, or if somebody's offering help, definitely be able to do that. Okay, there we go. Any questions? Now, let me ask, are there some of you that have a loved one that you're the actual caregiver for? Okay. Oh, Alice, you want? Oh, he's coming with the mic.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Just a question. You touched on a legal aspect of it. I was told in some states that based on the degree of the Alzheimer's or even a diagnosis itself, that they're not able, the patient itself is not able to enter into contracts.
That I don't know for sure. I just know today we were at a seminar talking about wills and trusts, and the big thing that was brought up is that somebody has to be competent. So the hope would be before anybody gets to a diagnosis that all of those legal things have already been taken care of. I don't know what ends up how, like if somebody agreed to sell a car or something and signed something, I don't know. That would definitely be something to ask an attorney. If you have a diagnosis of a dementia, I don't know how binding a contract is if you've got somebody who's not. This is more with the legal, is just trying to make sure, you have sort of your final wishes. But it's also, it's not just protecting that individual, but if you're married, it's protecting the spouse, especially too if something happens to the spouse before the person with Alzheimer's. passes away, and understanding with what needs to be done. One thing I was thinking of too, and I've mentioned before, Tippa Snow, if you go on her website, tippasnow.com, there's information about what they call like a partner support group. And I did that, it ended 2 weeks ago, and it was like a 5-week series, and it's with different caregivers. They ended up doing it over Zoom. And it was just people, they have kind of different topics each week, and it's just a group kind of coming together to talk about what was going on in their certain situations, and just kind of collaborating. And then at the end of it, those that wanted to have exchanged emails. So there's some, communication that's going on there. We do on the alz.org website, there's a tab with resources and like caregiving. There's a lot of information. That's one thing somebody had asked me one week, like we didn't do any of this when my mom was sick, and I wish we would have done. I don't think my stubborn father would have ever let help come in, but maybe to have found ways to try to have supported him more. But I also look, when my mom died, I had an 8th grader and a kindergartner, so my hands were full dealing with my kids. But just, know that you're not alone in the journey, and there's a lot of, resources to try to help. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't change the disease, it doesn't change the diagnosis, but hopefully it's the feeling where you don't feel like you're feeling alone. Anybody else? Well, I thank you. Next week which will be interesting, Allison, because next week's the actual one that's talking about for anyone that's living with dementia. So I don't really know and I haven't reviewed that presentation yet. And then that's on the 22nd, and then the 29th talking about, we're kind of ending it with a healthy living for, our brains and body, and ways that we can hopefully, with eating and exercise and socialization and all those things, it's almost like, can we ward off Alzheimer's from coming, to us or something? So we wanted to kind of end the series on a, well, exactly, some that is good, because, they're realizing some, trying to figure out, is there a genetic link? Is there, part of it environmental? But also, is part of it potentially diet? But it's also, are you dealing with somebody with diabetes? Are you dealing with somebody with high blood pressure? There's, lots of different components that they're trying to think, and that whole idea of healthy living for your brain and body, and then I think I mentioned it. There's another organization called the Alzheimer's Foundation of America, and I had gotten on their website, and I did a memory screening, and I did that in February, and it was like maybe 10 minutes on the phone, and it basically was a shorter version of the test that my mother-in-law used to get at the neurologist. And so she gave me kind of like a base score, and I was in the good range, so I was excited about that. But she said, so I asked her, I said, when should I do this? And she says, we recommend, 6 months to a year. And I was going to my gynecologist in February, so I said, when I go to the gynecologist, I'm going to call them again. And each year just look to see, and it's just, a quick test, just to kind of get like a ballpark of it. And then I did speak with a doctor over at Duke. He said, I'm 56. He said at 60 to kind of try to get like a baseline for, I can't necessarily qualify for, I guess, like a CT scan, but see if there's some tests through like the Duke Dementia Support Center to see about like if there's some baseline information, because my mom was 68, to kind of know, going ahead and knowing maybe in the next 4 years they'll have more information, from a genetic standpoint. So there's a lot of resources. I don't want anyone to feel like they're alone. That's part of why, I've been coming each week, just to try to educate and get word out to people. So I thank you for coming, and hopefully I'll see you next week. If not, then definitely come the last week. my hope is nobody comes next week, and that will mean we don't have anyone here in Glen Air that's living with it. But I think that will, yeah. But yeah, so it's good. Well, you guys have a good. Thank you.